My dear brothers and sisters, today I stand before you with a truth that echoes through the chambers of every human heart, a truth both ancient and urgent. It is a truth about the longing that lives deep down in the soul of mankind, the desire to be out front, the desire to lead the parade, the desire to be first. Yes, my friends, it is the drum major instinct. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be great. There's nothing sinful about aspiring to excellence. But the problem comes when that instinct is twisted by selfish ambition, when we crave the spotlight without earning the light, when we reach for power without lifting others, when we want the crown but reject the cross. This instinct, if unchecked, becomes the drumbeat of ego, drowning out the music of love, justice, and humility. It becomes the root of arrogance, the fuel of division, the voice that says, "I am more than you," instead of "I am with you." But I say to you today, let us not kill the drum major instinct. No, let us redeem it. Let us redirect it. Let us be drum majors for righteousness, drum majors for truth, drum majors for justice, drum majors for peace. And yes, even drum majors for the love of humanity, for the world does not need more men and women reaching for titles. The world needs people reaching for service. The world needs not more noise makers, but more bridge builders. So let us march not to the beat of selfish ambition, but to the rhythm of service, sacrifice, and sacred purpose. There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs to be out front. It is a natural instinct, rooted in our desire to be somebody, to matter, to be seen and heard. From childhood, we are drawn to attention. We crave affirmation, applause, and acknowledgement. We want to be the fastest, the smartest, the most important. That craving doesn't disappear with age. It simply grows more subtle, more sophisticated. It shows up in our titles, our cars, our clothes, our social media posts. It shows up in boardrooms and pulpits, in city streets and quiet homes. It shows up in how we compare ourselves to others and feel uneasy when someone else shines. This is what we call the drum major instinct, the desire to lead the parade, to be first, to be recognized. And while it may seem innocent, even harmless, there is a hidden danger that lies beneath its surface. Because when this instinct is left unchecked, when it is not guided by moral vision or love for others, it becomes a seed of destruction. It distorts the heart, it twists the soul, it turns our natural desire to lead into a destructive hunger for power. It creates the illusion that being first is what makes us worthy, and that anyone who is ahead of us must be torn down. We begin to measure our success not by how far we have come, but by how far ahead we are of others. We stop seeing people as companions and start seeing them as competitors. We begin to step on others instead of lifting them. The drum major instinct, if not tamed, pushes us into a life of performance instead of purpose. This hidden danger seeps into our relationships. It shows up in jealousy, in the need to always have the last word, in the hunger to prove ourselves right and others wrong. It creates families that compete instead of love, communities that divide instead of unite, nations that war instead of build peace. It shows up in racism when one race claims superiority over another. It shows up in classism when the wealthy use power to diminish the poor. It shows up in systems and structures that reward pride and punish humility. And we begin to ask not what can I give, but what can I get? We move from service to self-interest. We forget that true leadership is not about being seen, but about seeing others. Not about being served, but about serving. And perhaps the most dangerous part of this instinct is how quietly it grows. It does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers in our minds when someone else is praised. It whispers when we feel invisible. It whispers when we cannot bear the success of someone else. And if we do not pause and reflect, if we do not bring that instinct into the light of truth, it will lead us away from who we are called to be. We were not made to dominate others. We were made to love them. We were not made to always be first. We were made to walk together. But the drum major instinct tells us that to matter, we must be on top. It tells us that if we are not leading the line, we are being left behind. It feeds our fears, inflates our pride, and blinds us to the beauty of humility. There is a powerful transformation that can take place in the human heart when ego gives way to empathy. The drum major instinct, when left unexamined, drives us to place ourselves at the center of every story. It whispers that our value is determined by our visibility, that our worth is measured by applause, and that our purpose is found in being ahead of others. But in truth, the soul was never meant to thrive on ego. It was meant to be nourished by love, by connection, by the quiet strength of compassion. Ego separates, ego isolates, ego blinds, but empathy brings us closer to one another. Empathy allows us to see beyond our own desires and begin to feel the pain, the hopes, the humanity of others. It replaces pride with tenderness, replaces competition with concern, and shifts our gaze from the mirror to the window, from self to neighbor. When we begin to feel what others feel, when we allow their joy and suffering to touch us, we are no longer driven by the need to be first. We are driven by the need to be kind. We are not racing ahead to be seen. We are walking beside someone who needs a hand. The drum major instinct may want us to stand above others, but empathy teaches us to kneel beside them. To serve not because it earns recognition, but because it brings healing. To listen not because it makes us look noble, but because it makes someone else feel heard. Ego demands to be noticed. Empathy quietly notices others. And that quiet noticing can change lives. In a world where attention is currency, where fame is mistaken for value, it takes courage to choose empathy. It takes inner strength to step back when we want to step up, to celebrate someone else's success when we are longing for our own. But that strength is not weakness. It is a deeper power, a power that does not shout but uplifts, a power that does not seek a pedestal but creates space for others to rise. The drum major instinct says, "Make way for me," but empathy says, "Let me make a way for you." And in that simple shift, something extraordinary begins. Hearts soften, divisions begin to heal. We stop measuring ourselves by who is above or below. We start realizing that the highest place is often the lowest place where humility and service meet. Ego will always ask, "What about me?" But empathy asks, "What about them?" And when we begin to ask that question, truly ask it with sincerity, we step into a calling that is greater than any title. We begin to live with purpose, not just ambition. We begin to lead with love, not just authority. We begin to care more about the impact we have than the credit we receive. The world doesn't need more people chasing the front row. It needs people who are willing to step into the back and lift someone else forward. It needs people who listen more than they speak, who help more than they shine, who love without needing to be thanked. The drum major instinct isn't destroyed by denial. It's redeemed by direction, a direction away from ego and toward empathy, away from the spotlight, and toward the sacred work of loving one another. Greatness is a word that echoes through history. It has filled the mouths of kings and the dreams of the forgotten. But for far too long, greatness has been misunderstood. We have been taught to believe that greatness comes from being bigger, louder, richer, more powerful, that to be great means to be feared or followed. That greatness wears a crown, lives in palaces, and speaks from pedestals. But that is a distorted vision. That is not true greatness. True greatness is not found in how high you stand, but in how low you're willing to go to lift someone else. It is not in how many people serve you, but in how many people you serve. It is not in how much you possess, but in how much you give. Greatness is not about being above others. It's about being there for others, even when no one is watching. Jesus said it plainly, "He who is greatest among you shall be your servant." And that truth has echoed through time, even when it was ignored by the powerful. Greatness is scrubbing the floor so someone else can stand tall. Greatness is holding the hand of the sick when the world turns away. Greatness is feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the prisoner. Greatness is not loud. It's not flashy. It does not need a spotlight. It moves quietly, faithfully, through the shadows of everyday life. It is the mother working 2 jobs to put food on the table. It is the teacher who stays late to help the struggling student. It is the man who forgives when he has every right to be bitter. These are the people who walk in true greatness. These are the people history may forget, but heaven will never overlook. And yet we live in a time where people chase fame more than they chase purpose. Where titles are mistaken for character, where applause is more important than impact. But there is an urgency in our time to redefine what greatness means. The world is aching for people who don't need to be first, who don't need to be praised, who don't need to be noticed, only needed. The drum major instinct tells us that greatness is about being seen, being known, being admired. But the truth tells us that greatness is about being kind, being just, being loving. It is not about climbing a ladder. It's about holding it steady while someone else climbs. It's not about walking across a stage. It's about walking across the street to help a neighbor in need. There's a dignity in service that no crown can replace. There's a power in humility that no throne can rival. The world honors the one in the spotlight, but heaven honors the one in the shadows, doing the quiet work of goodness. Greatness is found in the courage to do what's right, even when it's not rewarded. It is found in the commitment to justice, even when it costs you comfort. It is found in the strength to love, even when you have every reason to hate. When we begin to see greatness not as the distance we rise above others, but as the depth to which we stoop to lift others, we begin to understand what it truly means to lead, not with domination, but with dignity, not with ego, but with empathy, not with ambition, but with love. There is a sound in this world that travels faster than compassion, a sound louder than justice, more persistent than truth. It is the sound of pride pounding its own drum. It is the sound of people trying to prove they matter by standing taller than someone else. This is the noise of pride, the constant shout of "look at me," the endless race to stay ahead, the anxious hunger to be admired. Pride has a voice that never stops talking, never stops comparing, never stops needing validation. And in a world that rewards that kind of noise, where attention is currency and humility is mistaken for weakness, it becomes harder and harder to hear the quiet music of purpose. Pride says we must always win, always shine, always lead. It tells us we are not enough unless we're ahead of the crowd. It teaches us to see others as threats to our worth, not partners in our journey. It convinces us that silence is failure, that invisibility is insignificance. But while pride screams, purpose whispers. While pride demands, purpose invites. While pride competes, purpose connects. The noise of pride might echo in headlines and applause, but the music of purpose is what makes the world truly beautiful. It is found in the stillness of sacrifice, in the rhythm of service, in the quiet courage to do the right thing when no one is watching. Purpose doesn't need to be seen to be strong. It doesn't seek the front of the stage because it knows where it stands. It isn't afraid to serve because it understands that greatness is not a position, it is a posture of love, of humility, of truth. The music of purpose plays in classrooms, in hospitals, in kitchens, in community centers, in every place where someone gives their time, their strength, their heart to make another life better. It is the melody of compassion, the harmony of justice, the steady beat of hope. The drum major instinct tells us to be loud so we're not forgotten. It tells us to push our way to the front so we don't get left behind. But that instinct, if left unexamined, drowns out the song we were born to sing. It fills our lives with performance instead of meaning. It makes us chase approval instead of impact. And slowly, without even realizing it, we begin to live for the applause of strangers instead of the peace that comes from doing what is right. There is nothing wrong with ambition, with striving, with dreaming big. But when pride becomes the engine and recognition becomes the fuel, we lose the very soul of our work. We lose the stillness, the depth, the clarity of purpose. True purpose is not about rising above others. It is about rising within ourselves. It is not about conquering crowds. It is about touching lives. And when we live from purpose instead of pride, we walk to a different beat, a beat not dictated by comparison, but by conviction, not by ego, but by empathy, not by noise, but by truth. And in that rhythm we discover something deeper than attention, something more lasting than fame, something more beautiful than applause. We discover who we were always meant to be. There comes a moment in every life when the noise of the world must be turned down so we can hear a different kind of rhythm. Not the rhythm of applause or ambition, not the beat of competition or ego, but a higher beat, a divine drum that calls us not to be first, but to be faithful. This beat does not echo through stadiums or news feeds. It resounds in the heart of the one who chooses justice over comfort, humility over pride, and service over status. To march to a higher beat means refusing to be driven by the shallow demands of recognition and instead being led by the deeper call of purpose. It means measuring success not by what we have achieved, but by who we have lifted. It means walking a path that may be narrow, that may not bring the spotlight, but always brings the light. The drum major instinct tells us to lead with power, but the higher beat teaches us to lead with principle. The instinct says, take the throne. The higher beat says, carry the cross. One is about ruling, the other is about redeeming. The world often celebrates those who shout the loudest, rise the fastest, and stand the tallest. But history remembers those who served the deepest, loved the truest, and stood for something greater than themselves. To march to that beat is to understand that greatness is not a race to the top, but a journey inward, a journey where the strength of our character is more important than the strength of our image. The higher beat moves differently. It doesn't rush. It doesn't push others aside to get ahead. It walks with those who are weary. It slows down to hear the cries of the hurting. It steps aside so someone else can rise. And though the world may not understand this rhythm, it is the rhythm that builds movements, mends hearts, and restores hope. Marching to this beat means standing up when others sit in silence. It means speaking truth when it is unpopular. It means loving people who cannot repay you and forgiving those who don't deserve it. It means doing what is right even when it costs you something, even when no one thanks you, even when the world rewards the opposite. This higher beat has always been the rhythm of real change. It's what moved prophets and peacemakers. It's what led Dr. King across bridges and through jail cells. It's what sustained mothers through quiet sacrifices and fathers through silent struggles. It's what carried everyday people through injustice and fear, not with anger, but with purpose. When you march to that higher beat, you may not always be noticed, but you will always be remembered, because you become part of something bigger than yourself. You become part of a sacred procession of souls who chose love over ego, who chose justice over comfort, who chose to serve instead of shine. The beat of this world is loud and fast and fleeting, but the higher beat is steady and strong. It teaches us to move not with haste, but with heart. It calls us not to be impressive, but to be impactful. It invites us to walk a path that few may applaud, but many will follow. Because when we choose that rhythm, when we let it lead us, we don't just lead others, we lift them. And in lifting them, we find that we, too, are being lifted by something greater than ambition, something greater than ourselves. There is a question that every soul must one day face, not in the noise of success, not in the height of our ambition, but in the quiet hush of eternity. What will they say at your funeral when the noise fades, when the titles no longer matter, when the accolades are forgotten and the spotlight has dimmed? What story will your life have told? The drum major instinct tempts us to build a life around being admired, to shape our days around being seen, to chase achievements that look impressive on the outside but leave the heart hollow. But at the end of this journey, none of that will truly matter. People will not remember the size of your house, the brand of your suit, or the power of your title. They will remember how you made them feel. They will remember whether you served, whether you loved, whether you lifted someone when they were down. We live in a world that often values visibility over virtue, recognition over righteousness, status over soul. But funerals are honest moments. They strip away the illusion and reveal the truth of a person's legacy. And the truth is, people don't gather to speak of how high you climbed, but of how deeply you cared. They don't weep over how much you owned, but over how much you gave. The question is not whether people will speak your name, it's whether your name will bring comfort, hope, and gratitude when they speak it. That is the measure of a meaningful life. That is the power of a life lived in love, in humility, in purpose. The drum major instinct tells us to be first in line, but the funeral tells us to be first in love. The instinct pushes us to be remembered for what we built, but the funeral reminds us that we're remembered for what we built in others. Were you a peacemaker? Were you kind when it was hard? Did you show up when no one else did? Did you forgive even when you had the right not to? These are the questions that echo beyond our final breath. These are the answers that write our real eulogy, not the one read aloud, but the one written in the hearts we touched. There is something sacred in a life lived quietly, faithfully, selflessly. You may never be celebrated on stages, but you may be the reason someone else found strength to carry on. You may never trend or be praised in the headlines, but you may have written hope on someone's soul. That is a legacy the world cannot take away. That is greatness no one can deny. It doesn't come from leading the parade, but from walking beside the forgotten. It doesn't come from applause, but from authenticity. And in the end, when the music stops and the crowd goes silent, your true legacy will not be found in what you did for yourself, but in what you gave to others. The time to ask the funeral question is not when life is nearly over, but while it's still being lived. Each day is a page, each choice is a sentence, each act of service, each word of kindness is another line in the story they will one day tell. The beautiful truth is that you don't have to be famous to be remembered. You just have to be faithful. You don't need the world to cheer your name. You need one life to be better because of yours.